All right, so before we dive into changing our pandas options, we'll need to generate a fake data set, and we'll need to make it pretty big for this example. So I'm going to utilize the NumPy library that we imported in the last lesson to create a random array, rather an array of random values, and then we're going to feed that to our data frame constructor method to create a pandas data frame. So you can just follow along with the syntax. I'll explain what it does in just a second. So let me just write it out, and then let's talk through it step by step. So I have my NumPy library that's stored as the alias np, so that's what I'm referencing here. Within that library, I have a random module, which I'm referencing here. Within that module, I have a collection of random methods. So NumPy is particularly effective at generating random numbers for us. We can do everything from integers to floating points and so on. This randint method generates random integers for us, and the first two arguments are the lower bound and the upper bound. So I'm telling NumPy that I want to generate random integers between 0 and 100, and then the final argument here is the array size that I want to return. So in my Python list here, which is within the square brackets, I specify that I want the array to have 1,000 rows by 50 columns, and all of those values, of course, will be between 0 and 100. Now by itself, this is just going to give us a NumPy array, so this is not a pandas object, it's a NumPy object, but I can store this in a variable called data. And keep in mind, every single time I execute this code, it's going to generate a fresh data set. And so, of course, when you are following along and doing this on your end, your numbers will be completely different. But the goal here is not to have a consistent data set so much as that is to have a large data set here in terms of rows and columns. So I have my data variable here that's storing my NumPy array. And if I use my data frame constructor method, which is available directly on my pandas library, and I give it data as its first argument, it's going to turn that NumPy array into a data frame. So we can see here it's been generated, and now that I'm happy with the result, I can store it in a variable called df. That's just short for data frame. Super simple. And I'll preview the last two rows of the data frame with the tail method, and there we have it. So I want to show you how we can access the options within the pandas library using the dot syntax, and they're kind of hidden away here. So what I can do here is write my pandas library, which is pd, place a dot as always, and this time I want to navigate to a module called options. You can see it appear right here. So I want to select it with the enter key, and then I'm going to place another dot, and we're going to keep navigating further down this chain within the pandas library. So what I want to search for here is this display option. That's just related to the display options within pandas. So I'm going to select that, then place another dot, and here we're going to get all of our available methods and attributes within that module. So let's introduce two in this lesson, a max rows and max columns. And the way that these attributes work is very interesting. The closest thing I can compare them to is how we use the columns attribute on our data frame, where if we just reference the attribute, it's going to give us the value, it's going to get the value, and then if we use the equal sign, we can basically provide a new value or set the value of that attribute. So let's say I want to find the max number of rows that a pandas data frame will output. So as we know, pandas truncates in the middle, and it cuts out a data set if it's too big, so it doesn't blow up the screen and crash our notebook. So let's find out how many rows that is in case we forgot. So we have this max rows attribute right here, so I can select it and execute, and you can see here that it's equal to 60. And if I output my entire data frame below, or as much as I can before pandas stops me, you'll see that in fact it is true. We're going to have about 30 rows here until we reach this line right here. We're going to have this truncation, which basically means pandas is cutting out that part of the data frame, and then we're going to finish off with the last 30 rows right here. Now what we can do here with this attribute is, of course, provide a new value. So for example, what I can do is take this exact code and provide an equal sign at the very end, and that allows us to set the value rather than get the value. So if I wanted to change it from 60, which is the default right now, to let's say something like 18, I can simply execute the cell, and now we're going to have a data frame that's only going to output a maximum of 18 rows. Again, it's going to be half from the top, half from the bottom. Now the way that it calculates 18 is a little bit up in the air. It depends on whether you are asking for an even number of rows or an odd number of rows, and at some point it's going to count the truncated row in the middle right here. At some point it's not, but generally 18. Generally the number you specify is how many total rows there are going to be in the data frame. So if I do something small here like 4, I'm going to get the first 2 rows of the data frame, that middle section, and then the last 2 rows, and it's not going to go beyond those 4 valid rows of data. So predictably, we have a complementary attribute here called max columns, and let's just once again access it from scratch. We're going to do PD, which is our pandas library. We then know that we have to search for options, and there's our options module. Within it, we have a wide variety of options that we can modify, and basically all the ones that we're going to be focused on within this module are going to be in the display section here. So I'm going to do display, and here are all of my available options. You can see there's things related to height and width, and for now I want to search for max again, and this time max columns. So we can see here, if I execute this, we're going to get the value, which is 20, and predictably when we output the entire data frame, we're going to get the first 10 right here. We're going to get this similar vertical gap in the middle here, and then the last 10 columns to the right of that truncation. And predictably, if we want to set this value to something different, it's the same process. Let's give it an equal sign, and we're going to set it to, let's say, 8 maximum columns. So now it's going to be 4 maximum rows, 8 maximum columns. So when I execute this code again, we're going to get a much smaller data frame. So many times you don't want to see the top 60 rows. If you want to see just a preview, we're typically used to doing something like the head method. But you can use these settings to give yourself a custom view, a custom look. If you're used to seeing just the first 10 rows of the data frame and you want just the first 5 columns and you want that to be consistent, you can specify an option like this at the top of your notebook, and it'll maintain that consistency throughout the entire notebook as you continue. So that's a quick introduction to just 2 of the options that we have available in pandas, the max rows setting and the max column setting. And in this example, we showed how we can modify those values with the dot syntax. We access that setting from within our options.display module, and then if we just want to get it, we just ask for the attribute, and if we want to set it, we provide the equal sign and the new value that we want it to equal. So that's an introduction to using the dot syntax, and in the next lesson, I'll show you how to do the exact same process, but with official pandas methods. So I'll see you there.